consortium of industries which works on object-oriented databases, object data management group or database management group. So they have been coming up with standards for object-oriented databases. So the ODMG3 is the specifications what they came up finally. So IDB follows that standard. That means the object manipulation language concepts what we have discussed. So it follows that. It's been developed by a French company. That means the IDB is developed by a French company called Sysra. It's a free software, which means that you can download it and use it. What is the difference between a free software and open software?
So open software, the source code is available. Like in free software, it's not available. It's
Free
just
software and open software, both you can download and use it. Open software, you will get the source code also, whereas free, you will only get access to use it, not about the source code. Okay, so now basically what all terminologies we studied in terms of what you call object-oriented databases, it follows or provides features like that. I mean persistent type data management. So we were talking about objects being transient and persistent. So there is an option to create. I hope you remember how we can create persistent objects. There were different ways to do it. What were the ways? Anyone remember? What are the different ways in which we can create a persistent object?
so we extend it from D underscore.
Yes, that is one way. That means you create a class which is persistent or mark an object as persistent. I mean objects at specific time, and then reachability based persistency definitions was another ways to do it. Okay. Um, it follows a client server model similar to most of the RDBMS or any database for that matter. It follows an client server model. It provides all the transactional services. Then it has object model. That means you have an option to define your schema in the form of an object model. Then inheritance property is the integrity constraints on the relations. What we can think about is the concept of methods are there, triggers are there, and one specific thing what we require is I mean IDB gives you a interface of query language also. Query language, when you say, don't think that it is the structured query language what we were talking we discussed, not that, but query language generally means that any database for retrieving and updating data you require some kind of a interface. So that is that, and basic application programming interfaces to this. So whether to C++ or Java, it provides interface. It provides you a definition based on the ODMG object definition language, object manipulation language, and object query language. These are somewhat similar to what you can say your DML, DDL kind of concepts. So similar to that, there are object definition language, which is specified by ODMG, that is there. Then object query language to retrieve objects, that is there. Then C++ binding and a Java binding is also there. C++ binding these bindings are required. I mean, we spoke about something called persistent programming language. What is persistent programming language?
So like the extensions to the existing
Yes,
object oriented.
I mean the object-oriented programming language, if it wants to interact with the object-oriented database, one challenge was in object-oriented databases, you will have objects which has got permanent storage behavior, or I can say persistent objects. Whereas object-oriented language was typically designed to have transient objects only. So there is an extension provided in the object-oriented language so that without modifying the language, additional support was provided. so that it can interact with object-oriented database in terms of handling this persistent objects. So that language was called a persistent programming language. So these bindings, what we are mentioning here is those extensions provided to C++ and Java for persistent objects handling. Now, if I'm not sure Smalltalk or loops or OBV Lisp, Object V Lisp, I'm not very sure whether you know any of those language, but Java you have studied. In Java, if you see, there is a root class object called object, and from that object only everything derives. From object you have system class coming up, object you have some other class. So if you look into the class hierarchy, object is at the root level, and then every class derives from the object class and can be manipulated as an object. Okay, so what all functions you have defined for with respect to object, that applies to every class what you generate. Okay, so similar way, an object model is defined by IDB. So there is an object class, and every class what you derive internally is an extended class of the object class. So what all functions the developers have developed commonly will be attached to the object class. Okay, type polymorphism is there. That means between classes polymorphism is available. Binary relationships is what is implementing. Literal and object types, there are two different types of uh, objects is possible. Transient and persistent objects concepts is there. Method and trigger overloading is possible in IDB. Method overloading, you know, trigger is something which you have studied in SQL to automatically change some values with respect to some insertion or updation operations, what you are already performing. Template based collections, that is the concept of template was there in C++. When it comes to Java, you have the concept of set, array, and all those things, which are, we call it as vector classes. So those concepts are also the multi-dimensional and variable size dimensional arrays are also possible. That means multi-dimensional is available in many programming languages. Variable size, normally arrays does not come with variable size, but that is possible with IDB. Support for large databases. IDB is designed basically for healthcare kind of an architecture. That means medical domain is the one which wanted some kind of an object-oriented database, and then Sysera developed IDB. So because of that reason, they have what you call patient informations in certain formats, and such millions of records they wanted to store. So that's why they have developed this. So obviously scalability is some feature what they have thought about it. So databases are up to several terabytes. And efficiency wise, if you see, database objects are directly mapped within the virtual memory address space. That means you don't require that days to be, loading and unloading kind of structure is not required. Directly you can handle them as in-memory objects. Object memory copy are reduced to the minimum. Caching policy is implemented. Programs are able to deal with hundreds and millions of objects without loss of perfection or performance scenarios. Okay, so basically this is designed to have large scale operations. Now, beginning of the IDB, this session we discussed that it is a client server architecture. Okay, so the client composed of, obviously client part is the one which will be having a application code, then a C++ API implementing that C++ binding, that means persistent programming language part, the client protocol layer based on RPC. Okay, and on the server side you have a server side protocol layer based on RPC, the object model implementation, the OQL engine, and the storage manager subsystem. We'll see one by one. Application code is clear. You have developed a application using C++ or some other programming language which is object oriented in nature, and or support C++ kind of an APIs. Then only you can use it, because this one has C++ API implementing that binding at the client side. Certain versions has got Java binding also. Then there is a protocol layer, which is a client-side protocol layer, which works on remote procedure call. What is remote procedure call? It's an object Java-based concept. What is remote procedure call? Have you heard about remote procedure call? Have you heard about remote procedure call?
Yes, sir.
What exactly it is?
Sir, it is. It acts as a server, sir. From like we can give our own uh, to like we are hosting our website on our server. Like so, local host is a remote procedure call. So
Procedure call is something to do with methods executing which belongs to a class. Okay. In Java, if you see, everything is class based, and every class can be operated through methods only, or every member instance, member variables can be operated with the help of methods only. So suppose, say I have a JVM. I hope you understand what is JVM, Java Virtual Machine. What is the role of Java Virtual Machine? That is the one which provides you platform independence. Okay. So you have written a code somewhere. You are, I mean, like you have a code here, you are running it. Now in that, you have a class A, and then there is another class called B. Class A has created an object, and then class B has some methods. Now, class B's method can be invoked using class B's object in class A. That is common thing. That means both the classes are in the same JVM, same machine, and I'm invoking a method which belongs to some other remote class. I mean, some other function, some other class. That is possible. Now think that class B is in another JVM. That means I have this laptop, I have another laptop which is connected over this laptop over the internet, and I have a JVM running on the other machine. In that, I have a class called B. It has a method called getB. Okay. Now, in class A, can I write B new object of B equals new constructor of B and create an object of B and then call B dot get B? Get B is the method available in class B, and B is the object. I mean, like new object B is the object of the class B. I'm literally speaking, I'm doing this right thing, like syntax wise, if you see. But the problem is class B belongs to some other JVM. Okay. So when class B belongs to some other JVM, the problem is the JVM in which you are sitting, you're trying to access, is not able to identify that there is a class B, so it will not work. So a remote procedure call concept is something like which helps you to execute these methods, which is in some other JVM, in my JVM as if class B is available in my JVM. So it's a remote procedure call execution, but looks like a local procedure execution. To do this, remote procedure call mechanism is implemented in Java with the help of two things called stub and skeleton. Stub is the client side part and skeleton is the server side part. So stub will be available in A's JVM, I mean the first machine JVM, and skeleton will be available in the second JVM. Now what happens is the stub is nothing but a program, a dummy program similar to getB. So when you say b dot get B, class B is available and its method is available, that kind of an feeling will given to the local compiler or interpreter, so that the local JVM will try to continue with the syntax verification. So when you compile your program, compiler will not throw an error because class B is not there. Such kind of message will not come because the stub will take care of what that part. But at that point of time itself, stub will now make a mark that it has to contact some remote procedure call which belongs to class B. And this has a connection to the skeleton. So it will pass a message to the skeleton that somebody has created a method here for accessing it. Now what happens is, when actual program runs, at that point of time, when class A invokes a method of class B, which is not in that JVM, at that point of time, what it does is the stub will send the request to the skeleton. Skeleton will execute your call in that remote JVM, and then it gives you the results. That results will be sent back to the stub. Stub will give it back to the calling method. That means in class A. All these things happens without the understanding of the first JVM. I mean, understanding in the sense it is not transparent to the user. So user will feel that class B is also available with me. I am executing it. But actually, class B is in some remote machine and you are executing it. This is called remote procedure call. Now, same remote procedure call mechanism is used in IDB to interact between client and server. So the client, when it has to make an execution, it uses the RPC's stub part so that the skeleton part is available to the server side of IDB and then executes it. So that's what the first point of IDB server and the last point of client part. Both these will interact each other. So that's the role of RPC in that. Okay, so please remember this point. There can be questions on how exactly IDB client and server interacts with the help. I mean, how exactly they interacts is the question. Remote procedure call is the technique what they use. How exactly remote procedure calls works, you have to know. And object model implementation is obviously the basic part required for any object-oriented databases, because that's how you define your schema. I mean, corresponding to the schema term what we use in RDBMS, the object model has to be implemented. And we set object definition language, object manipulation language, and object query language. All the three should be there with ODMG standard. So since IDB follows ODMG standard, it will have all these three set of languages. And OQL, there is an engine required, like SQL engine, what you thought, I mean, what you can think about in RDBMS structure, similar to that. And there is a storage manager subsystem. Storage manager subsystem is the one which deals with your persistent objects. So storing them in the secondary storage, loading them into the primary memory when call comes, and then taking it back. Also deals the transient objects also. Transient objects are created for some temporary purpose. That's why object-oriented databases comes with different types of data. Objects. There is objects which is persistent in nature. There are objects which are transient in nature. So you have to deal with that. The storage manager subsystem will deal with that. So if you look into the structure, you can see there are clients. Client has an application code, an API, which will do the binding part. That means the persistent programming language part is taken care by that. The communication happens through RPC layer. And between client and server, they use a TCP IP. That means standard internet works between them. So you doesn't have to have any specific protocol other than this regular internet or TCP IP suite to communicate. This can work on typical internet scenario. And on the other side, on the server side, you will find an RPC layer that has to talk to the RPC layer on the client side. So the skeleton will be available here. Object model implementation is one part. OQL engine is another part. So if you look into the server has three layers. The RPC layer, there is an object layer, and there is a storage management layer. So in the object layer, you have object model implementation, OQL engine, and method dynamic loader. Now, dynamic method dispatch or runtime polymorphism, you might have heard in object-oriented languages, specifically Java. Have you heard about dynamic method dispatch or runtime polymorphism? Have you heard about dynamic method dispatch?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
Yeah, but I like we had it in our
Voice is breaking. Okay. Dynamic method dispatch in the sense you have multiple methods. Now, based on what object I am using at the time of execution, based on that, it will decide which method has to be connected to it. There can be a method available in the base class as well as in the child class. Now, the object which I created is a base class object or a child class object. Based on that, which method has to be attached to it will be decided during the execution. So, since the dispatch of method, the right method happens during the runtime, we call it as runtime polymorphism or dynamic method dispatch. So, that same mechanism is available here in IDB also. Now, if you look into the storage management layer, four things are there in that. One is transaction and recovery system, concurrent services, index services, and memory mapped storage manager. First, we will talk about the memory mapped storage manager. Memory mapped storage manager in the sense, now you require some ways to store them into a normal memory. Normal memory in the sense hard disk, secondary storage. And also you need to represent them in primary memory in some format. We are talking about objects. Now, in case of an database management system like RDBMS, like Oracle or MySQL or anything, there also you have a memory management mapping mechanism where it will store your tables, tuples, each attributes into some specific format where the operating system can handle it into the secondary storage. So that conversion, see at one side you have a representation that this is the attribute and these set of attributes I will call it as a tuple. Such n set of tuples I am calling it as a table and so on. So this is one way to look at your database. But actually if you look into it, all these has to be finally converted into zeros and ones and then store them into the database, store them into the storage in based on what is the operating system you are using. Some of them may be having a 64-bit architecture, some of them may be having a 32-bit architecture, some of them may be using NTFS file system format, some of them may be using FAT32. So these mapping between how you store the actual content and what is the logical representation with respect to database, that is what taken care by memory mapped storage manager part. Okay, so same here, you have persistent objects, you have transient objects, you have methods connected to it, and then there are variables, there are messages available, all these things. So that part is taken care by the memory mapped storage manager. Now transaction and recovery system, same. Every transactions, what type of, I'm trying to collect certain data, update it into the database, or I'm trying to update the attributes of a particular object, something, or maybe managing an object completely. So all those considered to be a transaction. So transaction management and recovery process, all those things are there. Concurrent services in the sense, there are multiple transactions if it is happening, how they will be able to do it. By overlapping those transactions and then without ending up in data inconsistency. And index services, indexing is something what a database normally talks about it. So same indexing services are also here, but indexing services may not be as, what you call as complicated like what you can think about in RDBMS or sort of things, because object-oriented databases, they basically require these objects to be arranged in a tree kind of an architecture, which class object it is, how they are related to each other. So it's a tree-based architecture you have to form with respect to these objects. And again, categorize them as transient objects and persistent objects. So these things are taken care by that. So if you look into the architecture of an IDB, it's a client-server architecture. Client has an application code, an API we use written in C++ for the binding part, that is persistent programming language part. There is a remote procedure called layer, client side step available with the client to to communicate with the server. It communicates over TCP/IP network, RPC layer on the server side. The skeleton part is also available at the server side. Other than that, there are two layers, object layer and storage management layer. The object layer consists of object model implementations, dynamic method loader, OQL engine. Those are the three things. On the storage management, you have the mapping mechanism, indexing services, concurrent services, and transactional recovery systems. These are the components of a server. So please remember this picture, and you should be knowing what is what. You should be, if a question is asked to explain the architecture of IDB, you need to draw this picture and then explain each component of it. Okay, now in detail, we are trying to talk about each of those components. I mean, few of those main components in that storage manager. So the storage manager, as we said, it is at the server side. So it will provide services like persistent raw data management, transactional services, recovery systems, B-tree indexes, multi-volume database management. Multi-volume database management, in the sense we said this database is designed for a large number of data, large number of objects to be handled simultaneously in terms of terabytes. So the services for that, I mean, how you efficiently pick, what is the kind of accessing mechanisms, whether you have a sequential accessing mechanism or random accessing mechanism for objects, how you search them, all those things are taken care by the multi-volume database management part. Okay. This is little more deeper we are trying to do, because we said initially we spoke about persistent raw data management. So what exactly meant by raw data management? The central concept of storage manager is the raw object. Now a raw object is a persistent data tied to an object identifier named OID. Okay. Now we were talking about persistent objects. Persistent objects means for a particular class, you will have its objects existing beyond the scope of the program. That means even after program completes execution and then terminates, these object has to still exist in the database. Okay, so that, I mean, exist in the memory. That is what we call it as persistent objects. Now these persistent objects are stored into a secondary storage after the execution in the form of a text file, and each of those text files are referred as a persistent raw data. Now, when you attach an object ID to it, we spoke about object identifier when we spoke about object-oriented database. It consists of a name, it consists of a value, then it consists of an identifier number, a unique number. These three parts together is what was defining an object identifier. So an object identifier, when you attach to a raw data, that time only it becomes a persistent object. Okay, so now what you meant by having a raw data is something which doesn't have an existence as an object. It will have all the attribute values, but it will not be termed as an object because it is not attached to a class. Only when you attach an object identifier to it, it will have an existence, and this can be queried using your OQL. So if the data content is in the form of raw data, then you will not be able to access them and then operate them on that. Only when you attach an object identifier to it, it becomes an persistent object, and which can be accessed, which can be manipulated using the OQL. Okay. Now, why do we do this way? Because the object-oriented database is designed to store all the information in the form of files. Okay. Now that makes the things easy, because you have already operating system has a file management unit. So if my application, what is built on top of it, is also dealing and storing contents as files, then mapping is very easy. So what I do is I take a object, find out what are the attributes values. So attributes name and values, like a key value pair, you make an object file. Basically, it goes back to your document oriented concept, a key value pair. So here it is attributes and its corresponding values. All those things, you put them into the form of a file, and that binary file will be stored into the storage management part. That one, whenever you have to invoke it, it first go through a mapping, that is an ID is attached to it. So first you have to identify that this object is created from which particular object. What is the hierarchy in the tree what we have mentioned? That means this particular object is created from a class called student. Student is a subclass of something, and that belongs to object class and sort of things. So in the B plus tree, what we talk about indexing, will have some certain place this particular class belongs. So to that class only this object has to attach. So object ID is generated using that mechanism, attached to it, then it becomes a persistent object, then your OQL will be able to access it. An OID is composed of three fields: the storage index, the database identifier, and a random generated magic number. I mean, the OID what you are attaching tells you that which, I mean, storage in the sense, again, these files have been divided into folders and which database it belongs. Same like RDBMS. You have a table, that table will be belonging to one database. You can have multiple databases, and inside that you have multiple tables. And in table, I have a specific attribute. So to identify that, a storage index says that in which folder, and in that folder, which database it belongs, and then some random generated number to uniquely identify your what you call object. So the first field identifies the physical locations. The folders or drives which we have created is basically dividing them into different memory locations. And the second one identifies the database. Last one ensures that it is a unique number among the multiple objects belongs to that particular database. I hope you remember about segmentation, which is an operating system concepts. If I say that its counterpart like paging and segmentations, you might have heard about it. So what is paging and segmentations? Any idea?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes.
Sir, instead of loading,
Yeah,
Yes, tell me.
continue. It's fine.
sir, instead of loading like a complete program, we like segment, like make it smaller parts and upload it into pages, like in the RAM, like instead of.
Yes, in the primary memory, if my program is too large, then I may not be able to load either the entire program, or if I'm having multiple programs to be loaded, then one program of big size, if I load, there will not be space for other programs to load. So the concept of virtual memory is, what you do is you load only a part of the program, and if some other parts are referred at that point of time from the secondary memory, that part is brought into the primary memory. And if primary memory doesn't have enough space, swap out some unused memory, I mean unused content from the memory, and then swap in this asked requested part. So this is the concept of virtual memory. Now that part, when you say, two ways you can divide it. One, blindly I will cut my program into equal sized blocks called pages, and memory I have divided them into equal sized similar blocks called frames. So pages into frames I will put. So my program has got 5 pages. In the memory I got 2 pages. So 2 frames, which means that out of my 5 pages, 2 pages I will take and put it into the 2 frames in primary memory. And if something refer from other 3 pages, those pages are brought into the primary memory and then swap out something which is not used. So this is the concept of virtual memory. So the IDB uses segment based architecture. Now why we go for segment? Because the whole idea of segment is programmer will have a control on segmentation. He is the one who decides, suppose instead of writing a single program with single function, what will I do is I'll do modularization. I'll make separate functions. So then the memory manager can cut my program into different methods and take out each methods as each segment and load them. So I may not require all the methods together. So at one point of time, I'm using method A. So that method is brought into the primary memory, use it, that segment, and then send it back. Some other time you're using second method B, that time that module has been brought in, use, and then send it back. So user decides where to cut. Paging is not like that. It is blindly says 4 KB is the size of a page or 8 KB is the page of a size. So what happens is sometimes you will have anomaly in, a particular content is frequently asked, but it always ends up in page faults. I hope for the term page faults you remember. That means the page what you brought in, the content what you are looking for is not there in the page which is available in primary memory, and you are asking for the secondary to bring it. Okay, so that is called page fault. So that page faults will keep up happening. So to avoid that, segmentation based mechanism uses, and here each segment will consist of each databases. Okay. So currently the storage manager can deal with databases up to 1 terabyte. So which means that one segment what you are talking about can go up to 1 terabyte of data. But understand that it's not running with your regular 8 GB or 16 GB kind of a, primary memory architecture. You need to have a very heavy server side mechanism to handle that. Some points I'm skipping from here. Transaction and recovery systems, I can leave it. This part we will discuss, that is the structure of IDB, how it is defined. So you have an object class. So this is how the class hierarchy is developed in case of IDB. So there is an object class. Then you have a class. The name of the class itself is class, and then there is instance. And you can find the subclasses. Some classes are, the subclasses of class and subclasses of instance are the same. Why? Because this contains, the class subclass contains all the class definitions, and the objects what you create out of it will come under this. Okay, so that is what class and instance relates. So if you say enum class, so if I declare an enum class, then that comes under here. Now, if I create an object of it, the persistent and transient objects, that comes under the right hand side part. Okay, so similar struct class, that definition comes under this side, and its objects whatever I am creating comes under right hand side. Both you need to store, right? Class definitions also you need to store, the objects you need to store. Why we are talking about object to be stored? The second part, the right hand side block, is appearing in IDB because of persistent objects. Okay, because those objects also needs to be stored. So that's why we index them, or we keep them in a tree kind of an architecture in this format. The IDB has a slightly, almost the same like the ODML, ODL, what we defined, object definition language, what we defined in case of ODMG, somewhat similar format only it uses. We'll give you some examples. So the ODL example for IDB, if I have to define a class person with attributes first name, last name, and age, this is how we do that. This goes with the same way how we normally write a class in C++ or Java. Okay, now I can have a class object itself as a member variable inside a class. Like address is a class which contains house number, street, town, and country are the variables. Those things, I mean, I'm creating an object of that, and that object becomes a part of it. This is structure as a variable for another structure. You might have studied similar concepts. And another example is, if I am talking about another class objects as a relation, like say for a person, the spouse information is also going to be another person. Okay, so the person of a sorry, the spouse of a specific person will be another object which belongs to person class. So that's what it says, that person star spouse is another person and its object name is spouse. Suppose if I say that I have a set of objects to be added as a member for that, then I can use the set keyword, set, and in square bracket I have to mention to which class it belongs, and a star indicates that that is an object reference, belongs to some other class. So this example will tell you three things: how to add another class object, how to refer a relation between two objects of the same class, that means referring to same class, and then I am referring to a set of same class objects. Like children are objects which belongs to person class, and that itself is an attribute of person class. And then inheritance, the keyword extends we use. This is copy, I mean, like this is a copy of Java style, class employee extends person. So salary you add it, which means that all those variables what we define inside person class plus salary will come for employee. Done to what you call terminologies, that's okay. And then there are one or two questions I have given, so that I thought we can do it, but we didn't have enough time to finish it off. So what I want you to do is go through these two questions and then try to define its corresponding ODL representation. And then if you are finding any difficulty, please message, we'll look into it. Okay, so with that, we have proper understanding or a clear-cut picture that how IDB, an example of an object-oriented database, works. What are its features? What is the kind of architecture it follows? And then how exactly you work on objects in the storage level related to memory management. All those things we have seen. Okay, so the questions basically will be about features of IDB, its structure, I mean architecture of IDB, then about memory management part we discussed, about segmentations we spoke about it, that one, client and server interactions, so the remote procedure call you have to understand, and then finally ODL, I mean representations of certain scenarios, the schema writing part or object modeling part you have to do. This is how IDB works. So I hope we have touched upon almost all the things. The slides will be shared. You can go through that. And if you're having any queries, please post it back so that we can answer it. Please make sure that you go through all the slides and then you are expected to write answers. So practice XML's problems, that is writing DTD and schema definitions, writing XML files. Then from MongoDB, writing the structure of that database is what we use. Then from what you call object-oriented databases, these things. From distributed databases, types of transparencies, types of fragmentations, features of distributed databases, challenges involved in distributed database design. All those things you should be clear. And please practice because you need to write these things, finish it in time, because so many days you have been doing multiple choice questions. So please prepare well and then do well in the exams. Okay. Regarding project, we have already clarified. Dates also we have discussed. I asked someone to collect the information that who will want to present it on 25th and who wants to present it on 26th, so that you can finish it. Okay. So please get that detail so that we can wind up things. So thank you. All the best for your exams.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. These slides I will upload it.